Hi, welcome to those who've just joined. We'll just give a couple of minutes for any latecomers, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we'll get started. So hello and welcome everyone to HMPW and to this virtual session on supporting greater use of satellite-derived information in humanitarian decision-making. I'm going to be leading the presentation today. My name is Nikki McGough, and I'm Senior Director of Space and Climate at Caribou Space, which is part of Caribou Digital. So thanks very much for joining this webinar. I'm going to first ask a request of you, which is for all of you who've joined us today, in order that we can learn a little bit more about you. It would be great if you could use the chat function to share your name and your organization. And I'd also like to ask you a bit of a strange request, but I'm going to ask you if you could also write down the name of an animal next to your name and your role. And the reason for that is the animal you should choose should represent your background, expertise, and knowledge about satellite technology and its use in the humanitarian sector. So basically, the bigger the animal you choose, the more you know about this topic. And the smaller the animal you choose, the less you know. And that will just help us get a sense of what kind of expertise and background we have in the room. So just to let you know as well, we're going to be using the Q&A function today. So that will be open for you to add any questions that we have as we go through the presentation. And we'll answer as many of them as possible towards the end of the first half of the session before we break out into the discussions. And then hopefully you all got a notification of this when you joined the call, but just to inform you that this session is being recorded. Okay, so a quick introduction to my organization. As I mentioned, I work for an organization called Caribou Space. We've been working on issues relating to satellite technology and sustainable development and humanitarian programming for the last 8 years or so. And we've been supporting space agencies and donors that are directing funding towards new interventions or services and applications that aim to deliver a positive impact in the world. We also work with space sector clients, such as service providers, to help them design solutions that will have a long-term impact across the development of humanitarian areas. And we're part of Caribou Digital, and our organization looks at various different aspects of digital transformation, offering fund management, strategy, advisory, learning partnerships, and measurement and impact services. I'll just say a few words as well about our co-hosts, the UK Humanitarian Innovation Hub. A few of them are on this call as well. So the UK HIH is a pilot initiative funded by the UK FCDO. They've been investing in systems innovation partnerships. And one of the areas that they've been looking at over the past few years is the use of satellite technology in the humanitarian sector, which is what I'm here to tell you a little bit more about today. So you can scan the code and hear a bit more about what the work that they're doing and keep informed about their different work programs as well. And I know they're running a few other sessions as part of HMPW, which you should definitely check out. Okay, so a quick overview of what you can expect from today's session. Check you're in the right place. We've been working with UKHIH over the past 3 years, and so today I'm going to spend some time initially talking about the work that we've done so far, to summarize the state of play, if you like, in the use of satellite technologies in the humanitarian sector. And I imagine some of this will be familiar to some of you. So I'll just highlight a few examples and can kind of direct you to further reading as well. And then we're going to dig a little deeper into some of what we see as the barriers to adoption of this kind of information, and really understand, I guess, what is going on in the sector and what we've heard from those of you in the humanitarian community. And then I want to bring you up to speed with some of our more recent activities, which has allowed us to work with many of you to come up with ideas that could be taken forward to support greater use of satellite-derived information. And then today there'll be an opportunity for you to really feed into those ideas and hopefully help shape our work programme over the coming months. So I do hope you'll be able to join us in some fruitful discussions so we can hear a little bit more about how the work that we're planning to do could fit in with what you do as well. Okay, so let's start with an overview of what we've seen to date, and where we stand. So some of you may have come across this report already. For those that haven't, the Beyond Borders report was the product of a 12-month research initiative that we started work on with the UKHIH back in 2021. And the report was really an attempt to take stock of what was already happening in the sector, where satellite technologies were already being used, who was involved, and perhaps where there were gaps. I mean, in the report, we covered 5 domains that you can see on the screen here. So really looking at a wide spectrum of humanitarian events, and different use cases for satellite technologies in each of those areas of the humanitarian sector. And we aim to get a broad understanding of potential use cases across those domains, and also recognize that this meant, that what we were looking at was a really diverse and wide stakeholder group that these activities were encompassing. And in the report, we also looked quite broadly at the way in which satellites were being used. And on your screen, you'll see kind of 3 ways. Some of you, this will be very familiar, but I just wanted to make sure everyone had the same level of information going into this discussion. But 3 ways in which satellites can be helpful. So the first one is around Earth observation, which is really through the practice of remote sensing, enabling us to get a real picture of the Earth. So satellites can detect and can gather information about the Earth's physical, chemical, and biological systems. And then that data can be gathered together and processed and aggregated in a multitude of ways to provide really important insights about our environment. Secondly, satellite navigation systems enable us to locate things on the planet. So most of us have access to these navigation systems in our pocket through our smartphones, but they can also be used for a variety of applications in the humanitarian sector, including logistics and some supply chain management. And then thirdly, satellite communication systems, which allow us to communicate really between any point on the planet, including at times of crisis when areas might lose their terrestrial networks, but also there might just be remote areas where coverage isn't great. And so satellite communication allows us that opportunity to communicate where other technologies might not. So in the report, we also broke down the use cases across the humanitarian life cycle, which you'll be very familiar with. And the purpose of this slide really is just to show you that there really are use cases across the whole life cycle. And we've shown a few examples here. In total, we defined around 40 use cases and catalogued over 500 individual applications for which we were able to find publicly available data. So we've made all of that data available on our website so that people can understand what has been happening, what has been going on, what kind of things have been tried and tested, and also what, to the extent that we were able to find out this information, what's happened through those applications, how far have they been deployed, and have they been replicated. So hopefully that will be a really important and useful tool for the community to use and to understand, how satellite technology can fit into your work. And we're very happy to share any links that you need for that. Another analysis that we carried out in the report was a mapping of these 40 or so use cases against the stated data gaps in OCHA's State of Open Humanitarian Data report from 2021, which was when we were doing the research. And I know that that's just been released again for this year. And I think really there's just two messages I wanted to show with this slide. And the first is obviously that there's been really real progress. If you've read the report, you'll see that the level of availability of relevant data and also the level of completeness of that data has really increased over the 3 years since we first did this analysis. So it really shows that there has already been a fair amount of progress in finding data about ongoing crises. But what I also wanted to say, and something that we also analysed in our report, is that satellite-derived information can really play a role in filling some of these information gaps, and really has a lot to offer. And we believe there's still some untapped potential there, where it could really even close this gap further in terms of what information we will have available for our work. So I want to finish off this first section of the presentation on the current state of play with a few slides focused on Earth observation, which is the area in which we really see an opportunity for greater uptake and value for the sector. And there are a number of characteristics that we've defined that really make Earth observation data particularly valuable for decision makers in the humanitarian sector. So firstly, the sheer number of satellites that are now orbiting our planet means that the frequency with which data can be collected across a wide area is better than ever, and costs are coming down, and the speed with which that data can be received and processed is ever increasing. But also there's real characteristics about the type of data and the way that data is collected that we see as real advantages. So first of all, satellite can really look at any area that you want now with the provision of all these different constellations, and can provide what is in its rawest form a real objective source of truth. You can really see an impartial and impartial view of what's actually happening on the ground. And so we see that as, I think all of these characteristics are they're ways in which we can kind of explain why Earth observation data might provide better alternative to some of the other data sources that we might have traditionally used. And then just to give you some concrete examples, so I think the main caveat here is that I haven't necessarily been involved in all of these, but I just wanted to do a quick search of a few things we've seen out there. This is actually a project that we have been supporting from a monitoring and evaluation perspective through our work with the European Space Agency and the Global Development Assistance Programme, which is linking up members of industry from the European space sector with project teams from some of the biggest international financial institutions in their work with governments in various areas. So this is a project where the team is working with a ministry in South Sudan and is producing maps and models to understand flood and drought exposure in the country. And so this is the kind of first time that some of these products have been available for South Sudan, and all of this is information derived from Sentinel-1 data, which is openly available and publicly funded through the Copernicus mission. So the hope there is that this kind of information can help the ministry to better plan for what might happen in the event of certain weather events, and can better take action to increase the resilience of the country to those disasters. So this slide shows some work that was originally funded by NASA, but has since been replicated by the likes of UNICEF and the UK FCDO in a number of different geographies where it's been replicated. And the idea here is that satellite data can be used to provide early warnings of 4 weeks or so of cholera outbreaks, so that people can really understand when it might happen. And so, yeah, as I said, this has been kind of quite successfully applied in Haiti, in Yemen, and in Mozambique over recent times. And then lastly, this is an example of some more recent work that has been conducted earlier this year, I believe, which attempts to evaluate the extent of damage in Gaza using various different types of satellite data, combined with community reports and social media reporting. And I suppose at this point, I would just say that that is always a real kind of caveat and condition of some of this satellite imagery, is that we recognize that it can't be used in isolation. It's always best utilized when there are sources of data that can kind of be combined with it and form a full picture of the context. But hopefully this example, along with the others, gives you a flavor of the types of applications we're seeing, and really the wide range of ways in which satellite technology could support humanitarian work and hopefully your work as well. So I suppose the question that all of us want to answer is, okay, is this now mainstreamed? Is this just, you've shown that it's possible? Like, is this just happening everywhere now? And I think the short answer, and the reason for the rest of this presentation, is to say, well, not quite. Whilst we can recognize that there's been a lot of progress being made and there's lots of positive news and case studies, we still think there are quite a lot of barriers to overcome. And this is what our kind of real recent work and our next phase of work is really looking at how we can overcome. If we're really going to kind of generate the value that we could from this type of information. And so at this point, I wanted to just quickly show a slide, which is quite a nice way of describing the sector that we're faced with and the different players in the ecosystem. So this is something that we did when we were doing the Beyond Borders work, where we identified and catalogued, as I said, over 500 satellite applications. And so these were all found via desk research and a couple of interviews. And based on the information that we found about these applications, we tagged them along a number of different variables, including kind of who was behind the development of the technology, who was the intended user, was it a research project, was it something that was actually implemented, how was it funded, and all of that information is now available on, as I said, on the Space for Development website. But the reason for this graphic really is that one of the interesting things we found about the sector and about the dynamics in the sector was that if you look at the applications that we found around, if you look at the supplier and the user dynamics, we found that around 2/5 of applications that we found were designed for government agencies. And while on the supply side, around the same amount were developed by private sector companies. And so alongside this research and this kind of desk-based research, we also conducted a number of workshops and hosted a number of conversations to bring together some of these stakeholders from both sides of that supply chain and that market, if you like. And so we looked at people involved in the supply side that range from satellite operators to data providers, service providers. And then on the demand side, we spoke to representatives from NGOs, representatives from government. We spoke to voluntary crisis mappers. And as we spoke to these stakeholders, we started to uncover and document a number of different issues that we believed could be delaying or preventing wider spread uptake of satellite technologies. And some of these, I think, potentially come down to just the diversity of groups that are being brought together and the different backgrounds and kind of contexts that they're coming from. And so as part of this work, we started to, what we wrote up as the kind of end of that report was a number of different barriers. So if you look at this list, and I won't go through all of them in detail, but these are various things that were mentioned to us and that we found from our discussions with the different stakeholders within the ecosystem that are maybe preventing uptake and usage of satellite-derived information. And so if you look at, for example, on the user community side, we'll often have NGOs or government officials who are dealing with a specific challenge, that would be that climate change or conflict, refugee communities, water and sanitation priorities. And so those users will have specific objectives, specific operating constraints, and different priorities that they're trying to kind of weigh up against each other. And on the other hand, you have, as we've seen, mostly private sector suppliers of applications who may well be working in markets that they're not very familiar with, may work with companies that have kind of clear financial targets to meet, and in their marketing or description of what the products do, they might be using very technical language and jargon, which is very much at odds with these user communities. And so actually, when you start to unpick some of these issues, it's really not surprising that things like challenges relating to procurements come up, or a lack of understanding of negotiating licensing agreements, or a lack of clear monitoring and evaluation and impact evaluation of some of the ways in which these technologies have been used. And so, yeah, I guess what we wanted to do, I guess as the starting off point for the next piece of work was really understand these barriers a little bit more, and really try to get to grips with what could be done to address some of these kind of diverse needs and diverse challenges within the ecosystem. And so that leads me to our latest work, which we started last summer in August 2023. And so the UK HIH supported us to run an end-to-end ideation process to dive deeper into some of these barriers that I've just described, and that had been part of the Beyond Borders report. And so it was a 3-stage process. First, we went back to a few of the barriers from the report, and we did more research through interviews and through desk research. And what we wanted to understand was whether, after a little bit of time had elapsed, whether those barriers still existed, whether any of them had been resolved, but also to gather more information, particularly from the less technical communities within the humanitarian sector. I think in our first report, by the nature of what we were doing, we were talking to people who were maybe the early adopters, who had used technology, in particular satellite technologies, a bit more. And this time we really wanted to try and get beyond those groups and understand their perspectives. But also we wanted, through desk research, to map out what was already being done. What were the initiatives we could find that were already addressing some of these barriers that we had identified in the research report. And so the product, I guess, of the interviews and the desk research that we did was really this set of insights, which are all available on the website. I believe Carlotta can share a link to that in the chat. And they really focused on 3 barriers that we saw to be really, really important and kind of came up again and again. And those were the low awareness of the use cases and potential value, low capacity from a technical sense to actually use the available data and tools, and also issues around trust, and particularly concerns around ethics and data privacy. And so I won't go into these in a lot of detail, but I just wanted to kind of highlight 3 themes that emerged and that are written up in a bit more detail in our insights document. But the 3 themes that came out really were that, I mean, this first one is really that despite progress being made on awareness and a lot of work being done to kind of publicize how satellite technology can be used, some people, you know, it definitely is a buzzword that has had a lot of attention over recent years, but there are still obstacles to adoption which are still based on kind of knowledge gaps. So specifically being able to make the case internally to spend, you know, precious time and money on data, on training that would be required to use the data. And then also some reluctance and hesitation to adopt new approaches, and maybe that coupled with some misconceptions or maybe misunderstandings about the potential value, so either overestimating what satellite technology could do, or the potential harms, and maybe having concerns that maybe are less justified around what satellite data might mean for the oftentimes very vulnerable groups that we're trying to serve in a humanitarian setting. And then another theme that emerged was really around technical capability and the availability of tools and training materials that are out there and are designed to help people to make better use of satellite information. And there was a feeling that despite there being a real wealth of materials, not everyone knows how to best make the most of them, and or how to actually integrate them into their work. And so felt that there was a need for better signposting, or and this was potentially the case, I think, for some of the smaller organizations, maybe where they didn't have dedicated GIS teams or dedicated technical advisors. And then thirdly, another theme that kind of came out was just an acknowledgement of the complexity of the ecosystem and the difficulty of working in a very fast-paced environment, which sometimes makes coordination difficult. It's not clear whose role it is to develop, generate, share data, and individuals do not always have time to kind of get more clarity on those issues when they're dealing with catastrophic events. And so just the fact that that's often a barrier in just the ways that people are working, and not having time to necessarily focus as much on what data they could have in an optimal environment. And so we took those insights into 3 workshops, and spent some time, first of all, in those workshops, getting a shared framing of the system in which we're all working, and then asked those attending the workshops for their creativity in coming up with potential solutions to these issues. And so we encouraged participants to think of ideas that would have broad applicability and relevance, and so really taking a bit of a systems lens to this. And I think those workshops were fantastic at bringing together people from different types of organization, and with different levels of prior experience, but also trying to think outside the box and think about new things, a whole range of different things that could be done, both from the hugely ambitious and potentially not necessarily immediately feasible to the low-hanging fruit. And so at the end of those workshops, we kind of took stock of the ideas that we had, and then kind of went through over the months since then. So those workshops finished in November. In the months since then, we've taken some time to kind of go through those ideas and shortlist how we might work with the UK HIH to take some of them forward. And so what I wanted to do today is share a little bit more about some of those ideas that we have now selected to take forward over the next year. And so I'm going to present those ideas briefly, and then there'll be a chance for Q&A, and then we will break out into breakout groups to discuss them in more detail and hear from you. What we're particularly interested in hearing from you is kind of how you think these ideas could fit into your day-to-day working practices, and try to think through what the implications of that are for us as we go about developing them further. Okay, so system level developments is what we're kind of calling them as a group, and really what we're looking for here is new tools or processes that could support more humanitarians to take data-driven action. So just before I go into the ideas in detail, I wanted to just share these principles, which is what we've stated up front as we kind of start this work, as the way that we want to work with the community on this, and things that we really strongly believe in and want to adhere to. So firstly, we're really looking at what we can do to bring about systems level change. So we want to, as much as possible, tap into what already exists in the system. We want to leverage existing networks, existing coordination mechanisms, existing tools, and not reinvent the wheel. So we want to build on top of what exists, but also do things that can have a broad reach, and can bring the whole system up, rather than looking at a very specific tool for only one context or one organization. Secondly, this is really about partnerships and about outreach, and having the kind of conversations that we're looking forward to having with you today, which is really seeking advice from those people who know this work the best, and can help us, can provide input, and provide us with a helpful steer with the work that we're doing to ensure that we're really meeting the needs of the humanitarian community. And thirdly, and really importantly, we're absolutely aiming for co-ownership of these ideas, and we're looking for partners and collaborators who can play a role in keeping these ideas going into the future, and can kind of join us on the journey as we scope out how we're going to go about doing this work, and then think about how it can be made best use of into the future, and then and kind of kept alive and kept relevant. So we recognize that as Caribou Space, we're working really at the fringes of this sector. And so we need to work with some of you to help make sure we steer our work towards where we can generate the most value over the long term, and be as helpful as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the ideas. So this first idea looks to address the challenges of evidence and being clear on the value of investing in satellite-derived information. So the use of satellite data, as we've heard from many people that we've spoken to, does require an investment of time. And in some cases, when higher resolution data is needed, for example, it requires an investment of funds to purchase and then analyze data from commercial sources. But even when using open sources of data, even the ability to invest the time in locating that data and then analyzing it, processing it is not nothing. And so we recognize that more organizations and more professionals need to have access to that evidence and that kind of business case to be able to justify that internally. So whilst we've seen a lot of case study examples, for example, like I showed earlier, we've seen case studies that show where satellite data has been used. Those case studies are available, but the materials themselves are somewhat dispersed across different places. And there's also, I think, the gap we really see is the availability of information on, particularly on cost benefit and the use, the relative advantages of using Earth observation data, for example, versus other forms of data. And I think we know conceptually it exists, that value is there, but I think actually sitting down and doing the research that can really make the justification a bit more solid has not necessarily been done as much as it could be. And what we'd really like to do is check whether that's true, check what information is out there, but also highlight where more research is needed. So the other thing we've found through the first research report we've done and in follow-up conversations is that whilst there's a lot of research focusing on proving the technology, proving the models, there's not as much work that's easy to find that really looks at the downstream outcomes and benefits. Did the use of this data really lead to better decisions, better humanitarian outcomes? And so what we're really looking for now is an opportunity, and what we're hoping to do is bring together what we can find that's already out there, work with organizations that can help point us towards, scope out that kind of evidence that we want to collect, and then help us to find the literature and also present that in a way that then makes it easier for people to find the evidence that they need. And so we're going to be looking for partners that can work with us on that. And so absolutely encourage any of you that feel like this might align well with what your organization does to join us on this initiative and talk to us further. So just to give you a sense of what the kind of output of this kind of work would be, it's really about putting together an evidence synthesis, which is designed into a visually appealing and user-friendly tool. So the tool would capture what evidence we have been able to find and would summarize any conclusions from that literature. So it would, in this example, you can see the color coding to show what the actual conclusions were of that research, whether it was positive, neutral, or negative outcomes that were found. And the other thing about doing this kind of tool, as I already mentioned, is that it can really show us where there is a lot of information and where there isn't as much, and so can help us to highlight and help everyone to get a better sense of what research doesn't yet exist and where maybe more attention could be focused to make sure that we have the type of research and evidence that we really desperately need. So these evidence syntheses is something that we've done a lot of in Caribou Digital. It draws on our kind of monitoring and evaluation expertise and our knowledge of kind of how digital transformation or these different tools, how these tools can be adopted. But we're particularly keen to speak to organizations that as I said, could see the value of this kind of learning and research in the work that they do or in the work of their network. So please do get in touch if that's you. Okay, secondly, as I mentioned before, one of the things we acknowledged and one of the things we talked about a lot in the workshops was the fact that there are several existing data sources out there. There are all sorts of data platforms, algorithm platforms, knowledge repositories, online training resources that are available and often available for free. But the issue that we heard from many people is that for some people it's very hard. They either are not aware of them, and so in our insights, when we shared information about existing initiatives, we often heard from people, oh, that's really interesting, we didn't know that existed, we didn't know that was available. But also that sometimes people aren't able to find exactly what they're looking for. Maybe it's not in the right language, or maybe it's not designed at the right level of background expertise. There may also be jargon barriers, which mean that people don't necessarily know if they're accessing the right thing or if they're going to find it useful. And then coupled with this, we heard earlier that some of particularly the smaller organizations do not necessarily have dedicated in-house technical support. And so what we wanted to do with this is really find a way to help navigate and signpost people towards relevant content all in one space. And so our suggested output here is to bring together really two types of content into a single location. So on the one hand, bringing multimedia content into an interactive, visual, kind of scrolly telling wiki format, which then also has an AI-enabled knowledge guide, which is trained on very specific documentation, very custom-made kind of training data, and can give much more specific and customized support and guidance for that individual user. And so combining, if you like, the generic with the bespoke. And I think the potential of these AI-enabled guides has really grown with the availability of LLMs and generative AI over the past 12 to 18 months. And so this is actually something that we've worked on in other places, and particularly with the European Space Agency, in combining this custom project documentation with the kind of general knowledge that AI large language models now bring to create something that's an effective tool that can give highly customized responses and guidance. Excuse me. Okay, so that's the second idea that we're kind of thinking about and to take forward. And then thirdly, there's this idea of being able to provide technical assistance to more of the organizations that could really use it. And I guess the problem we're trying to solve here is that, as I said before, we know that there are large volumes of data out there. We know that there are all of these really valuable materials, but what we found is that there's really inequitable access to those resources across the humanitarian sector. And so for those organizations that don't have that dedicated team, but know that they could be making better use of information and could be making better use of information to be more prepared for example, for sudden onset crises, or to answer the kind of key questions that they have in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, let's say, that these organizations would really benefit from having a bit more one-on-one support to really tailor the types of information that they could use and the way that could be integrated into their decision-making processes. So our idea here is to launch a call for applications from any humanitarian organization that faces climate-related emergencies and who believes they could be making better use of satellite-derived information than they're currently able to. And so the idea would be for us to provide very bespoke, customized support to really understand their ways of working, understand how that organization currently makes decisions, what systems they use, what data they have, what data they don't have, and then work with them through a technical assistance assignment to support them to develop templates and tools and practices that they can then do over the longer term without that bespoke support. But importantly here, I guess, talking to the system level change that we're really aiming for here, the idea is to also extract more generalizable lessons from the work that we can provide and the support that we can provide to a few organizations kind of directly, but do more to kind of actually document how other people would go about doing that. What does it take to actually start to investigate different uses of data? And we could use the knowledge guide that I mentioned before to kind of document some of that as well and provide a bit more guidance. Okay, so that's the end of the kind of presentation, if you like, but maybe we can go to Q&A. David, do you want to let me know if there's any questions?
We don't have any questions in the Q&A box, so I think we can actually move to the polls and do the questions within the breakout groups.
Okay, sounds good. So if you do have any questions, then keep them and we can answer them in the breakout. So what we wanted to do before we go on to the breakout discussions is just ask all of you 3 hopefully very simple questions, multiple choice questions. And these are really to just tee up some of the things that we'd like to talk about in the breakout group discussions. I would encourage everyone, there's no right or wrong answers to any of this. It's really about trying to understand your working practices a bit more so that we can understand how these kind of tools and processes would fit into that, and hear a bit more from all of you what challenges you face. You don't need to have, if you've put on that in that chat box that you are a mouse or an insect and you've got really no background experience on satellite, that's absolutely fine. It's really more about your ways of working that we're interested to hear about today. Okay, so I'm going to launch the poll. Please do share your thoughts with us. Okay, here
Nikki,
it comes.
you have one
Yep.
question that just came in
Okay.
whilst people are answering the polls from
Yeah.
Hirsch Holland, who's asking about idea 3 and is curious about the funding model solutions that you would envisage for this, also for scale up of such a service and the use of space solutions more generally. Are there particular funders you see that are interested in these opportunities?
Okay. So this is for the idea 3. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so hopefully I can answer your question, Anna, but very happy to follow up more on this. So the idea here really is we're going to be working on this over the next 12 months. So we recognize that what we do now, we're not going to be able to serve and work with everyone who has this need. So we're really going to, first of all, in selecting the organizations that we can work with, we want to have diversity so that we can look at organizations facing different types of challenges, of having a different role, for example, that they're playing in coordinating or implementing, I guess, services and humanitarian assistance. So we want to get a diversity so that we can understand how the process and how the technical assistance differs across those different groups. But we also, that's part of the reason why we want to kind of document some of the insights and the lessons from those engagements so that we can make it as applicable as possible to others. That said, so that's what we've got planned for those 12 months. That said, we are really keen to think about this as a longer term provision. And so to the extent we can talk to other facilities that are already set up about how they could work with, extend the reach of the work that they're already doing, share lessons about how we've worked with these organizations and what we've learned about that, to try and build that into what other people are already doing. And then if there are still gaps, then we need to think about what other potential funders or potential, what other people have an interest in kind of seeing this be continued and scaled up. So I hope that answers your question, but do feel free to get in touch if there's more that you'd like to talk about on that. Okay, so we've got about half people have answered the question now. If you're still online, there's absolutely no wrong answers. Please do feel free to tell us what you think on these polls.
Someone has also just added another question in the chat just whilst we're reading. Someone's asked how we are differentiating what we're doing with what NASA Lifelines are doing and offering.
Yeah,
which is a great
thanks,
question.
Richard. And hi again. So we're first of all, I should say that I guess members of the NASA Lifelines team we have worked with and actually kind of all worked together with on the Beyond Borders report. So it's really great that the work that they're doing, the work that we're doing is all kind of coming from a similar point and coming from similar research. So I think the first thing to say is that we're, I think, very aligned in terms of our kind of knowledge base and what we believe are kind of what is needed in the sector. So the two teams are very much in discussion and trying to support and amplify each other's work. And I think some of the stuff that they're working on is hugely important, and we're looking to try and amplify what they're doing as much as possible. And I don't think there's any real duplication at the moment, because we're keeping those discussions kind of really live and open and checking in with each other a lot. But I think both of our teams are really working towards similar objectives in terms of really breaking down some of these barriers and looking at what else the system needs. Okay, I can see some others.
We also have Jesse Petchman who's asking to sort of build on what you mentioned earlier, to see what you see as the role of the humanitarian information management and GIS organizations in our work. And Jesse's also interested in meeting next week from HOT's side.
Great. Hi, Jesse. Yeah, so I think, you know, when we ran the workshops, we did have people in kind of information management roles and GIS roles. And we're not, as I said, really trying not to duplicate anything that's already there. We're really trying to fill some gaps and work with organizations that are not necessarily getting support from anywhere else. But I think there is a question over the longer term as how we can try and build things more sustainably into what is already out there in the system by learning from these engagements that we're going to be doing and trying to scale it up through other means. So I think watch this space. We're going to try as much as possible to communicate exactly how we're taking these things forward and really I guess that work I said about kind of generalizable insights is really with that in mind. We want to involve people in this discussion and think through with others about how this could be made sustainable over the longer term. Okay, maybe we'll have a quick chat about the polls, and then I think we're going to be ready to move into our breakout groups. So there'll be a couple of breakout groups, and we're just going to be talking more generally, as I said, about aspects of your working lives and how that might fit in with some of the work that we're doing. So just quick reflections, I guess, on these poll answers. Really, really great to see that, you know, it does sound like absolutely understand the time constraints are always somewhat challenging when you're really looking for kind of evidence and best practices. There's not always time to go into that in a lot of detail, but I think this kind of reinforces that there is also a need for more accessibility, I guess, of digestible and ready to use information. And so, yeah, I think the idea of being able to hopefully the idea of being able to present something very easy to read and very where the analysis and some of the insights have already been kind of processed. That's absolutely the idea. So a real mixed bag actually of answers in terms of where people are currently going for learning and kind of knowledge related to satellite data. So I think that would be really interesting to dive into a bit more in the discussions now and just hear a little bit about your experiences and some of the challenges maybe that you face with those different sources. And then also a mixed bag on in-house technical expertise. So interesting to see it's kind of roughly third across the ball, but yeah, still I think many people who don't have that dedicated support, and I think that kind of chimes with what we heard when we were running some of the workshops at the end of last year. Okay, great. Thanks so much for your engagement in that poll. We're going to break out into groups for roughly 30-40 minutes. We'll see how conversation is going. And then we won't do a report back. We'll just stay in our groups, and then we'll come back just briefly at the end, and I can tell you a little bit more about how you can stay engaged and how we can kind of keep you updated on the work that we're doing. So I'll stop sharing that poll now, and then if we can be put into breakout groups, that would be fantastic. Sorry, Richard, you were midpoint and then we had to leave. So apologies for that. I'm just going to share my screen again. Is my screen already shared or not? Can you see my presentation? No. Okay. Can you see it now?
You're on presenter mode.
Okay. This one? No. Anyway, Okay, well, anyway, thank you very much for those of you who stayed for our breakout rooms. I just want to thank you for joining today. I know there's lots of sessions going on, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to our presentation and hear more about the work that we're going to be doing. And also, it was great to have the opportunity to hear from all of you on your ideas. So just got on the screen here a few follow-up points in terms of how we're going to be taking this forward. So first of all, a summary of the session outcomes will be shared. Please let us know if we do have everybody's emails, but please let us know if you prefer that we didn't contact you, and we can absolutely remove you from the list. Do get in touch. I've left my email address there if anyone would like to contact us or discuss more, even in person. Next week, I'll be in Geneva for part of next week, so very happy to make more connections and talk about anything that you've heard today in more detail. And feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, where we'll be sharing more updates. And then there's also this QR code for more updates from HIH on their program of work. So I think that's it from me. Thanks very much for joining, and hopefully stay in touch with many of you over the coming months. And enjoy the rest of HMPW. Thanks, everyone. Bye.